Since 1981, April 28th has been designated the National Day of Mourning, a time when workers, families, employers, and others come together to remember those who have lost their lives to work-related incidents or occupational diseases. Every year, the Victoria Labour Council, the BC Federation of Labour, the Canadian Labour Congress, and labour unions across British Columbia co-host public ceremonies to honor the occasion. It is a day that offers workers the opportunity to remember the dead, injured, and ill, as well as publicly renew their commitment to improve health and safety in the workplace. The Day of Mourning is also intended to focus attention on what we can do to break the silence of indifference and say enough to the suffering caused by hazardous workplace conditions. We must educate others about basic health and safety rights and prevention measures, help social justice and other groups educate at-risk members of our communities, negotiate greater decision-making power for worker representatives and joint health and safety committees, make health and safety a collective bargaining priority, encourage local media to report on health, safety, and environmental issues, create monuments to promote public awareness of workplace health and safety, and encourage elected officials to improve workplace health and safety regulations and ensure stronger enforcement of existing legislation.
My name is Mike Iso. I'm president of the Victoria Labour Council, and on behalf of the Victoria Labour Council, our members and executive, let me welcome you to this day of mourning for workers who are injured and killed on the job. Before we start the formal remarks, I wanted to particularly acknowledge the support and help of QP Local 50, John Burrows, the executive and members of the City of Victoria Local who have been instrumental in helping us put this together. And we're glad that you all could come out on a very nice day. As most of you probably know, the first day of mourning was introduced as a result of an Act of Parliament in 1985, and we've used April 28th every year since to mark the, at this point, thousands of workers who are killed and injured on the job site. What we're going to do today is we've got 5 or 6 speakers who are going to give you a quick story on their issues relating to worker safety. We're going to do a moment of silence, and we're going to have a Piper play for us. So that's the agenda for today. And as our first speaker, I'd like to welcome Orion Irvine, who's bringing greetings on behalf of the Canadian Labour Congress. Orion?
Brothers and sisters, today is a day of great sadness across Canada. Today is the day that we gather together to mourn the loss of nearly 1,000 workers who die each year in workplace accidents or from workplace illnesses. Each week, close to 20 workers do not come home to their families, their loved ones, and their friends. Every year on April 28th, we gather to mark the National Day of Mourning. On this sad occasion, we remember those we've lost needlessly: mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, grandparents, friends, and co-workers, all of whom should be with us today, alive and well. But they are not. They went to work one day and never came home. This is a tragedy. This tragedy is not just a personal tragedy for everyone who has lost a loved one, but it is a national tragedy, because workplace accidents and illnesses are entirely preventable. They happen because not enough has been done to stop them. Prevention is just one of the jobs we do as union activists, and we take that role seriously. We make sure that employers follow the laws and regulations, and we also advocate for better laws. However, another part of that job as union activists is to make sure that employers who do not follow those laws are held accountable. We do have good legislation in Canada. We have laws that allow for the criminal prosecution of business owners and executives who have, through negligence, been responsible for the deaths and fatalities of workers and other workers who have been exposed to illnesses that will eventually cause their death. These laws allowing for criminal prosecution came as a result of union pressures following the 1992 West Ray mine disaster in Nova Scotia, and after thousands of other workers have lost their lives over the years. However, since the criminal code changed in 2003, only 2 provinces have laid charges against employers. This is despite that 8,000 workers have died from workplace and illnesses since the law was passed. Clearly, we have not seen the intended deterrent effect that additional criminal charges should have generated. So we need to change the way that workplace death and injuries are treated by the authorities. Anytime a worker is killed or seriously injured on the job, that workplace must be treated as a potential crime scene that it is. The evidence there may be needed for prosecution later on. Police and Crown prosecutors need to be more aware of the criminal negligence provisions in the criminal code and what their requirements are in investigating. We need to understand the importance of using those laws to investigate the death and serious injuries of workplace and charge anybody who is responsible. So we have a job to do today, my friends. We need to make sure that a proper investigation is conducted every time a workplace injury accident occurs. We need to document health and safety issues in ways that will help with any criminal prosecutions if the need arises. We need to help others in our communities to do the same, because not every worker has the good fortune to belong to the union and the protections that it brings. If we can help police and prosecutors, not only can we see more charges laid in cases of criminal negligence causing death in the workplace, but those charges will have a preventative effect on other employers. Our goal is simple: make sure that every worker gets home safe and sound at the end of their workday. We are tired of attending funerals and watching families grieve for the death of their family members. So we send a message: when a worker dies on the job, their place is a potential crime scene. And these needless workplace deaths are crimes that must be stopped. Thank you.
The day of mourning is a very significant event for us. The concepts, mourn for our dead and fight for the living, can be traced back to the beginning of our union. The very creation of the National Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Union, chartered in 1891, the reason 10 brave men came together was, for the years before, the fatality rate for linemen and electricians working throughout North America was a horrendous reality. In 1890, half of the employed linemen in the United States died going to work. We knew things would not get better unless we came together to demand safer working conditions. The electrical industry is an industry that injury is only a fraction of a second away at all times, so we have to be diligent by ever staying in the moment. I could talk to you today about American fish boats ramming naval vessels, sending 5 of our members to the hospital this week, and how lucky our members were not to be standing on the quarterdeck facing a 5-meter wall of water, or on the gangway which snapped off and went flying. And the 2 members scheduled to be working up the mast later that day would have become human tetherballs, dangling by their harnesses. But we understand accidents outside of our control happen several times a day, every day. I could talk to you about contractors knowingly exposing workers to asbestos with no disregard to his construction employees, the other workers on site or their families, and how we need provincial government who will legally and criminally pursue an employer who would knowingly convict his employees to their own prolonged death sentence by a horrific disease. Today, we remember and commemorate workers whose lives have been lost and workers that have been injured in the workplace, and recommit to the challenge of preventing, reducing, and eliminating workplace deaths and injuries. Observing this day will strengthen our resolve to establish safe conditions in the workplace for all of us. It is much a day to remember those who have fallen, as it is a call to action to protect the living. So we must breathe new life into efforts aimed at securing safer and healthier workplaces. Today, I want to speak for the living. I want to speak to the strongest measures that we can put in place on every construction job, shipyard, and industrial plant throughout British Columbia. I want to speak to the return of a mandatory certification process where every craft worker is red sealed and licensed to the standard across the country, where every worker serves a recognized apprenticeship in their chosen craft, becomes a journeyman or journeywoman. The apprenticeship system is the single most important measure that we can put in place to save lives and slow injury rates, at the same time providing consumer confidence and economic freedom for the region, the country, and the individual. We live in a province today that requires no training for an electrician to wire your house where you live and sleep, no ticket for the gas worker to hook up your stove, and no ticket for the elevator mechanic to install and repair the elevator in your office building or apartment. This lack of required apprenticeship training is putting workers, consumers, and the general public in harm's way and must be stopped, and this is the best way to ensure construction workers in BC will get to return home to their families at the end of their shift. Thank you.
In addition to marking workers who are killed on the job, the Day of Mourning is also intended to draw attention to workers who are injured on the job. And in that light, I'd like to ask Jim Pullen to come up. Jim is from the CAW Local 333, the transit local here in Victoria. Jim?
Good morning, brothers and sisters. This year, the Day of Mourning hit really close to home. My wife and I know 3 families who suffered a huge loss this year. One family lost a grandson, one family lost a nephew and an uncle, and a third lost a son and a brother in a single workplace accident. Clark was only 29 years old when he fell to his death at his worksite. This is one life too many to lose at such a young age, never mind the other 180 others who went to work never to come home. We also need to honor the countless number of workers who were injured on the job in 2012. Hundreds of people whose lives will be forever altered just because they went to work. I'd also like to share another disturbing statistic with you. In 2012, 20 of my brothers and sisters who went to work here in the Capital Region as transit drivers were assaulted just for doing their job. 20 people whose outlook on life has been changed by the mere fact that they went to work that day. These tragedies need to stop, and stop now. We need to stand together and push for reform so that everyone who goes out to work returns home at the end of the day to be with their family and their friends. No one else should be assaulted, injured, or die on a job site, and it's our goal here today to make sure we honor those who are no longer here, and in their memory, push even harder to make sure we all come home at the end of the workday. Thank you.
I think one of the challenges for all of us is how to make safer work sites, and how to make safer work sites, especially for younger people who are just now entering the workforce. In light of that, I'd like to ask Darlene Gallant to come up. Darlene is a member of the BCGEU, and she's also the Young Worker Rep on the Victoria Labour Council Executive. Darlene?
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming out. I'd just like to thank my brother here for mentioning Westray. I'm from the east coast of Canada, and that all went down in my hometown. And to this day, I have friends whose dads are never going to come home. No clear explanation of what happened. And in those counties, stuff like that's still going on. So it really just goes to show the importance of getting out and really putting home with young workers the importance of health and safety. Last month, on April 12th, the Employee Action and Rights Network held a sit-in in Vancouver, Nanaimo, and for the first time, Victoria. And it was to bring back Grant's Law. Grant's Law is legislation that was put in place after the death of Grant Capady, a gas station worker who was dragged to his death in 2005. And he was dragged to his death because an employer told him that if someone stole gas, that he was responsible and it would be taken off his paycheck. And it happened. So the next time it happened, unfortunately, he chased down that car and he was dragged to his death. And he was dragged to his death for $12.30 worth of gas. And that's just a shame that something so minuscule in the big scheme of things took someone's life. Grant's Law stated that customers had to pay at their gas before they pumped it, and also stated workers working late at night in retail had to be accompanied by a second worker or had to be protected between a barrier and them. On April 15th of 2012, the working loan part of Grant's Law legislation was severely undermined by an additional third option for the employers. The third option allows for employers to have a camera and a panic button instead of having 2 workers or a barrier. I don't know any of you, but when I joined the workforce and I worked in places, that's just not going to cut it. everyone knows that 2 people or a barrier is going to be a better preventive measure than having a camera. Having a camera so if something happens, they can record it. So maybe they can record who actually did it. So we did a stand basically to send a message to government and business alike that young workers want all workers to go home safe at night. And it's just that simple. So in the next year, EARN is going to be putting out other campaigns as such, and we're hoping that we can get our union brothers and sisters and their young workers to help us out, to make sure that all workers, it's this simple, just go home safe at night. So thank you for your time.
In addition to the responsibility of workers and the responsibility of employers to prevent injuries and death, clearly we need a regulatory regime that addresses the issues as well. That's why I'd like to acknowledge in the crowd today Marian Alto, who is a councillor of the City of Victoria. Welcome, Marian. And I'd like to also acknowledge the work of our next speaker, who has been a regular visitor to Day of Mourning celebrations over the years in Victoria, our Victoria Beacon Hill MLA, Carol James.
Thank you so much. I want to recognize the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations on whose land we are here today. And I also want to express my appreciation to Labour, to the Victoria Labour Council, and to CUPE for organizing this event today. As other speakers have said, it's critical that we remember on this day, that we remember those who've lost their lives, that we remember their families, their friends, and those who are injured on the job. I want to speak just for a minute about some families that I met over the last number of years. I sat in 2009 in Campbell River with a logger who'd been injured on the job, in his living room with his family, his children, his wife. And what struck me the most was the emotion he described at not being able to go back and support his family. The struggles that he felt as someone who'd worked in the logging industry for his entire life. And what that meant to him, yes, economically to his family, but more importantly, what that meant to him as a person and as a proud worker. I also had the opportunity to speak with some of the farm workers who you will remember were injured in an accident on the Fraser Valley. And the shame when months later we discovered the government still hadn't moved on inspections for unsafe vans that caused that accident. I was at a memorial for the mushroom farm workers who in tragedy, one by one, went into a confined space to try and rescue each other and didn't come back out. And the one individual who did come back out is now severely injured. His daughter has become a passionate advocate for health and safety in the workplaces. And I want to know in this province, when it became an unnecessary regulation to ensure health and safety in our workplaces. That's necessary regulation, and it's time we brought back strict, not only regulations for health and safety, but inspections to ensure that that occurs in workplaces all across this province. We also know how important it is to have the inspectors out there, because as has been said already, and particularly for our young people in workplaces, it's very difficult to speak up. It's very difficult when they feel the threat of their employment for them to raise concerns, or for our new immigrants and our new workers who aren't aware of the kind of health and safety regulations that they have every right to have in the workplace. I have standing with me our team. Maureen Karajanis from Esquimalt Rural Roads, Gary Holman from Saanich North and the Islands, Jessica Vanderveen, Oak Bay Gordon Head, and I see our MP, Murray Rankin, in the audience as well, and Charlene Thornton-Joe, who also is a city councillor from Victoria, who also arrived with Marianne Alto is here as well. You have strong voices, and I want to commit to you today that although we are here to remember those who've been injured, those who have passed on, it's just as important today that we remember the work that we have ahead of us and that we not forget those families and those individuals, and that we all commit today to do everything we can so we not only see these numbers going down, we see health and safety followed at every workplace in our province. Thank you so much.
I'd also like to acknowledge in the audience today who coming off a 10K run, Dean Fortin, our mayor. Dean? And I'd also like to echo Carol's thanks to Murray Rankin, our new MP for Victoria. We really appreciate the work you're doing, Murray, in taking the fight to Ottawa, which seems like a very long ways away sometimes, and we do appreciate the work you're doing, so thank you. What I'd like to do next before I call up our Piper Colin is I'd like to, if we could just bow our heads and take a moment of silence. Thank you, Colin, and thank all of you for coming out to honor the memory of the 181 workers who died in the past year as a result of going to work. We hope that number is much smaller next year, and we ask you all to join together and to make that a reality. So thank you very much for coming out, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
When I think about what goes on in Oakbay-Gordon Head, because it's an urban riding, I think about chemicals. I think about toxic substances and how we can protect the workers of Oakbay-Gordon Head from those things. One of the issues that's come to my attention recently is the loss of regulations for estheticians, for people who do nails and use very, very powerful chemicals in their work. I was in a salon the other day and a pregnant woman was working with these chemicals with no ventilation. This is the kind of thing that we need to look into. As our world becomes more and more modern, we need to be thinking not just in terms of physical accident and injury to the body externally, but we need to be thinking about the effects of chemicals and substance on our workers and how we can protect them.
Day of mourning is something that's really important. I think all people should be aware of workplace safety, especially in the last couple of weeks. We've seen how lack of regulation has caused death in Bangladesh, where over 300 people died because the management of the company just refused to go with regulations and safety, and also even in Texas, where they say that less regulation means a better economy, and yet when the fertilizer plant blows up and kills people, who's going to look after their families? I think that this year, or this past year in 2012, we lost 181 people due to workplace accidents and occupational disease. So we really need to keep in mind that stronger regulations are better for everyone, not just worry about the corporate profits.
You know, the Day of Mourning is something that was started by the Canadian Labour Congress, gosh, I think like 30, 40 years ago. And it's now in more than 30 or 40 countries around the world. A Canadian labour initiative that has international repercussions. Whether you actually see a building come down in Bangladesh, whether you see an explosion just this week in Saanich, it's always a constant reminder that we need to be vigilant. We need to be always striving to make sure that the men and women that do the work return home every night to their families. It's important work. We need to make sure it continues. Thank you very much for the Victoria Labour Council, to all of the labour unions that continue to push this and make it a priority. We owe you one.
My concerns around Day of Mourning center around non-unionized workers. While unionized workers have protections and they can hold their employers responsible, those young people, especially that work in the service industry, their employers are never held accountable for anything, and I don't think that we even get the reports of the injuries that happen. So hopefully WorkSafe BC and the government will do something about giving those workers greater protections in the workplace.
I think it's important for us to remember on a day like this how the clearing of government red tape, as the neocons put it, turned out to be an attack on safety rights, environmental rights, and so many other things that we need government to take a lead role in to protect workers and society in general. Red tape is a red herring, in my opinion. It's masking the intent of all these regulations, which is to protect people.
I've been active in health and safety for the past 10 years. Working with the Young Workers Movement, I've gone into high schools and facilitated health and safety courses to the next generation of workers so they know their rights and responsibilities in the workplace. The Day of Mourning is important to me because we have a chance to remember that workers die when they go to work, still in this country. We always need to remember how far we've come in health and safety and how far we need to go. Most importantly, we need to fight for the living. Thank you.